The race is on, and Max Verstappen's run of success has led McLaren team principal Andrea Stella to warn he is a championship contender. But has Red Bull really made enough progress to close the gap in the remaining 7 races? And what does that say about McLaren's competitive situation? I'm Edd Straw, and with me to tell all are Samarth, Kanal and Ben Anderson. Samarth, McLaren team principal Andrea Stella has said that Max Verstappen is a title contender, and he stressed that's in capital letters. But is he really?
So I see Max Verstappen as more of a kind of disruption to McLaren rather than a title contender. I just don't think that there's enough races in the season for him to claw back that deficit and then beat the McLarens. We've got Singapore up next. I don't think it's the same kind of track as obviously Monza, and we've had Azerbaijan, where Red Bull have excelled recently. And one of the big questions is basically, can Red Bull do the same thing at Singapore on a rainy Saturday or Sunday? And I don't think they can. Singapore obviously is a street circuit. You know, there's loads of outlying factors there that will affect whether Max Verstappen comes and wins. But it's probably a good chance for him to, get a good result. And then the next 3, you've got USA and Mexico especially. I just don't think Red Bull have got a chance there to win over the McLarens. I think they're very strong. And Max Verstappen is driving at an incredibly high level, as we saw in Azerbaijan. Absolutely amazing. But to say he's a title contender, it's a bit of a stretch. Obviously, there's some question marks there yet to be answered. And I don't want to go in and say, Red Bull definitely don't stand a chance. But at this point, I think it's a bit of a stretch.
Ben, 69 points, 199 to play for. Are you going to give people something to be more excited about and the possibility of a 3-way title fight?
I think we have to get excited, don't we? Like the last 2 races has breathed new life into the championship. We were all talking about it just basically being a McLaren write-off in the constructors, which it still is, and a 2-horse race between Piastri and Norris. I think if you're going to call Max Verstappen a title contender, we all called Norris a title contender last season, and at this point in 2024, he was 10 points closer to Max.
I'd like to say
Piastri.
I made it very clear he was not yet, but he could have made himself one, but he never did.
So outside, I think it was fair to say that you could have called him an outside title contender. So Max is at least that. What I would say is I feel like as the hunter, Max Verstappen is a more tantalising prospect than Norris was. So I think that I give Max a bit more credit in terms of hunting down Piastri's points advantage. As Samarth says, there's some McLaren stronghold tracks still on the calendar. Definitely Singapore, probably Abu Dhabi. Mexico's a bit of a tricky one because it's low downforce, but you run high downforce and then the altitude takes the downforce away. So Singapore will be the acid test. If the Red Bull breakthrough is real, it should show up there. Obviously, Verstappen was second there last year, but it was quite a convincing win for Norris. So it's not going to take a huge step for Red Bull to be in that picture. I think if Max dominates Singapore, then it's game on, because although he'd need to be perfect, I think, to win the championship, he could actually be perfect from now to the end of the season. If anyone is going to be, it's going to be him. Piastri can't afford to just finish third in every race and win the championship if Max does win every race, so he's got to still go and do some work, having had a nightmare Baku. But you'd have to say, obviously, it's still very much McLaren's to lose.
I'm just going to disagree, though, in a sense. Even if Max comes in, dominates Singapore, has an absolute Max Verstappen blinder there, I still think the ball is in McLaren's court. 100%. Even Qatar, I think, should be a McLaren track. They excel on medium kind of downforce, long corners, and they love that stuff. As Stella said, they love to roll through the corners, is what he said at Zandvoort. I love that. I still think it's going to be a bit of a false dawn if everyone goes a bit crazy after Singapore and goes, Verstappen's definitely in it. But as you said, he's more of a threat than Norris, and a constant threat. So what I see is he's just going to be taking points off maybe the championship leader, and he's going to decide the championship, but I don't think he's going to go for it. I don't think the Red Bull has it in it. Of course, questions to be answered, right? I mean, I can sit here and look like a fool at the end of the season. I might well do
Cynic.
That. Yeah.
But it's all going to come down to the car, isn't it? Because if Verstappen can win the championship, he probably will, because he's Max Verstappen. So we don't have to worry so much about that. But in order to get the results he needs help from McLaren. And that's why I pretty much took what Andrea Stella said as a kind of warning to everyone. It's like, look, don't be complacent, because the Red Bull's strong enough now that if we keep shooting ourselves in the foot and have a load more Baku weekends, then things could go wrong. That's how I took it. That, to me, seems to be the dynamic rather than a playing catch-up on merit, if you like. No matter how much better the Red Bull is, it's not going to become the dominant car in terms of performance, is it? It might be able to take on McLaren more often, but McLaren should be able to score enough points quite easily to stay ahead Drivers' Championship-wise.
Yeah, you would think so. I mean, Stella did say that Baku and Vegas are like the two worst tracks for the way the McLaren is figured. So they were always expecting Baku to be bad. They won Baku last year, which makes it a slightly strange comment for me. So there must be something about the way they overhauled the car in the winter that suddenly makes it much more of an outlier for that circuit as a car.
Don't have the flexi wing anymore.
Exactly.
The mini DRS, as it was called, which they cunningly had for the suitable tracks last year.
Yeah, which really helped them in terms of loading the car with downforce and then shedding it for the straight line speed. I do think also maybe Stella is slightly protecting his drivers. So by throwing the attention onto Max, how good Max was, how much of a threat he remains, that is a good way of covering how badly the drivers did in Baku. I think even if that is one of the worst McLaren tracks, they still could have been in contention with a cleaner execution, doing a good job in Q3, qualifying better. They could have been a factor in that race. It was very much a race dictated by where you started. So if that's McLaren at their worst, and we know there are tracks coming up where they're going to be much better, then yeah, that shifts the dial again. And it then comes down to how well can Piastri and Norris execute. And I think the story of the season so far is that Piastri, apart from Baku, really has been mistake-free near enough. Norris not so much. So you'd have to favour Piastri at this point, unless he just has another couple of Baku weekends, and then it really is game on.
There is one more thing going back to Verstappen being a title threat, and that is that Yuki Tsunoda had his best Red Bull result there at Baku. Now, if he can find himself higher up the grid, he can become, more of a thorn in the side of McLaren, because Red Bull have been fighting with one car. And that's a big trouble for someone trying to threaten for the Drivers' Championship or even be a contender. And with two Red Bulls in the mix, I think, Verstappen has way more of a chance, because you can use Tsunoda to slow down other cars. You can use him in the tactical fight, which, as of now, he's unfortunately been completely out of.
Yeah.
So there's that question. Can Tsunoda kind of step up and help?
I don't see it, though.
No, I don't see it either.
He'd need to make more gains, because I would say Tsunoda did beat Norris in Baku, but that was more Norris finding himself behind Tsunoda than Tsunoda getting himself ahead, if you like. But he's on an upward trajectory now, Tsunoda, so maybe. I guess the really positive thing, Ben, is that Red Bull do seem to have made a genuine step with the car, the Monza floor, front wing tweaks. Gary Anderson wrote a very good piece that ran on the race website before the Baku weekend talking about the front wing and how that interacts with the floor. So at the very least, Red Bull have taken a step. Andrea Stella pointed out they're hearing a lot more radio traffic with Red Bull about avoiding bottoming, kind of meaning they've sorted out a lot of their problems and they're just in that zone of just, right, how low can we run it without there being problems, because that produces downforce. Yeah. So the Red Bull's certainly going to be globally a better car. I guess that's the main takeaway. So it allows Verstappen to be a slightly bigger thorn in the side of the McLaren drivers, at least.
Yeah, that's what gives me the hope. Like, you look at different bits of it in isolation and go, oh yeah, but it's a little bit too little too late, and that may be the case. But the gains they made at Monza, it's tempting to think, oh well, Monza and Baku are both basically the same kind of circuit. They're both about straight line speed and low downforce, and that is true. But McLaren were pointing out that the corner profiles are slightly different, and Baku is all slow speed, 90-degree corners, basically, where you need, if you're Max Verstappen, really positive front end, attack the entries, as he said, and then that's it. That's kind of most of your job done. Monza's not quite the same as that. There's a few bits that are a bit more medium to high speed in terms of the cornering challenges, and they dominated there. So that's the bit. If they can extrapolate that to circuits that are more biased that way, because globally the car is just working better, they can run it lower, they can access all that juicy downforce that we know is down in that ride height region where Ferrari can't run their car, then suddenly that could unlock so much more. It could unlock more pace on more types of circuits, but also it could help Verstappen in terms of tyre management in those races where you'd expect thermal degradation to be more of a factor, and that's where McLaren have been so strong this season. So yeah, it's all theoretical, but I like to cling to hope that we can have a proper three-way title battle rather than just an all-McLaren affair from now to the end of the season. And it's all about if that Red Bull car is, as looks like it may be globally better than it was before.
Yeah, I guess that's the best case scenario for people who want to see a good fight. I still think McLaren should be okay, but
I'm being optimistic. I get accused of being negative all the time, so I'm choosing to be optimistic on this show.
Nothing wrong with that, but it's going to be interesting to see that trajectory. And I think probably the most positive thing is that technically Red Bull have managed to make that progress and understand what's going on with the car. They've slightly tweaked the way they do things, not massively, but that's the really encouraging thing, isn't it, Samarth, particularly moving into next year? Okay, it doesn't make any difference to what the power unit situation is, but at least means that maybe that little rut they got stuck in with the car has been eased out of.
100%. If you're on the right development track, even this year, even when things aren't completely carrying over to next year, it's a big deal to get things right and not be stuck in that horrible, I'm bringing an upgrade, it doesn't work, let's go back to the drawing board, let's do another one, let's throw away all this carbon fibre. Actually, I don't know why I said that. Do they throw it away? They recycle it.
They're not anymore. They can't throw it away now.
Can't throw it away
now. Sustainability violation from you
exactly.
there.
Yeah. Oh, no. I'm sure we'll get into that later. It's important to know you're on the right track. And things do carry over. And it's also important to know that your team is kind of working in the right way. You're getting the right correlation in that loop of simulator, CFD, track time. You're doing all those things correctly. So it's a big deal, and I think it increases Red Bull stock massively for next year if they can get it right.
The other thing about development this year is it puts more pressure on McLaren. So instead of McLaren thinking, oh, you know what, we've got this completely wrapped up, constructors fine, but drivers championship-wise, which will become the focus, they've had to still keep throwing bits at the car. So even if De Stella is deflecting a little bit by talking up Max, certainly the pattern of the season would suggest they haven't given up on developing the car. They've still been bringing tweaks to it because they have to, because if they just stand still, then the gains that Red Bull make will just be extrapolated further as the season goes on. So we've seen so many times in F1 history where a team thinks, oh yeah, we know we've got big rule changes coming up, we need to divert resources to next year's car. But the title fight just means you can't leave the current car alone. There's still more to be found. So regardless of what carries over, you need to be mindful of rivals always trying to catch up. And we know Red Bull are pushing really hard and will continue to push hard with this car from now to the end of the season.
Yeah, very much so. And there's always things you can do, even if you're not devoting wind tunnel time. That Monza floor was apparently purely CFD based in terms of the changes they made. So there's still little bits you can do. Everyone will have a little task force of some sort. Yeah. I know James Key, I did an interview with him, the Sauber technical director. He referred to a little special forces unit they had working on the car. So yeah, that's going to be interesting. I think the key thing is that just means McLaren know they can't be complacent. That's what Andrea Stella is trying to say. Well, we're going to continue on the topic of McLaren versus Red Bull with a bit more focus on the McLaren situation now. And we're going to do this through some questions from the Race Members Club. So, Samarth, the first one for you from Richard Matera. Should McLaren now prioritise Oscar Piastri?
Ooh, indeed. I think it's dangerous right now to prioritise one driver over another. There's not much in it. And also, you risk kind of alienating the other faction. There's a whole team of people there as well. You don't want to prioritise one over the other. I think what they should do is make it ad hoc, situational. Whoever's ahead gets the strategy. You know, they get the advantage. They get to pit first, or maybe
that's going so well for them.
I know, but they've created the precedent there. That's the problem. McLaren have done this, and I'm sure you've covered it 100 times now. But with the papaya rules, they have put themselves in that situation where it has to be done. I don't think you can go all out and prioritise Piastri. That completely alienates Norris. And you don't want him making mistakes and feeling worse because they need to retain him for the future. So yeah, you can't just go in and prioritise Piastri. In an ideal world, you'd have a first and second driver, but McLaren have a very good pairing there, a very good pairing. So again, it's going to come down to really restricting how many points Verstappen can score because he is the title threat in capital letters. So
not according to you though. Disruptor.
I mean, I've become so cynical in my years.
Am I persuading
He's
you?
a disruptor. God, that's such a techie term, disruptor. It's such an annoying LinkedIn term. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I said that. If we can just edit that out and I'll just say something like, he's got a startup mentality. A guy. Yeah, oh no.
Right,
he's blue sky thinking.
He's circling back to the championship fight after a pause.
Yeah. McLaren need great synergy, right? That's what they need between their two drivers. Therefore, they cannot prioritise one. Let's circle back to that, Ben.
Do they need it though? The Constructors' Championship's done. to all intents and purposes, isn't it? Well, the team harmony is all about that. McLaren have inverted the kind of priority, which to fans and most people in F1 history has been the Drivers' Championship, even though obviously it's not what pays the money. But McLaren's thing is the team comes first. The drivers have totally drunk that Kool-Aid and bought into it. We saw after Monza when Piastri could have thrown the team under the bus for not quite following the papaya rules as maybe he thought they were written or at least understood, but he didn't. He stepped back and said, well, I stand by what I said on the radio, but, I agree with Lando, team comes first and we've got to protect the culture, protect the people, etc. But once you've won the Constructors' Championship, surely some of that can go out the window and it can be Piastri versus Norris. In terms of the prioritising, they're just not going to do it because they didn't do it last year when Norris was the outside title contender, if you want to have that generous view that you didn't share with me earlier of last year. They didn't say, right, Lando, you're definitely number one, Oscar, you're number two. They did the kind of situational thing you mentioned where they might ask one to help the other if it's just a foregone conclusion that guy's not going to be a factor in the battle for the victory, but it didn't really make any difference. And they're closer on points now. I think it's about 6 points closer that Norris is to Piastri than Norris was to Max at this point. It's just every man for themselves. They keep saying they want to give the drivers, the opportunity to fulfill their ambition and fulfill their talent, but it's kind of like my interpretation of that is the Drivers' Championship is just up to you guys. We don't really care about it. If it works out for you, great. But actually, I think they're prepared to lose it to Max if that's what it takes for them to win the Constructors and keep the team happy and all the guys and girls paid and feeling like everyone's pushing in one direction.
Wow, I don't think so. Because if you lose it, you're going to really annoy one of your drivers and the multiple parties involved with that. The Mark Webber and all the people behind there, and you can't.
I think they're prepared to do it. Seriously? I think they're prepared to do it. But I don't think they care. They've said, basically, if you don't follow our diktats, you're out. They'll find another driver. They believe that they're so good at making Formula One cars now that it's not quite you can plug in anyone, but there's I detect a little bit of that engineering mentality of the driver's another component, and you can slot them in, and they'll do a great job at a threshold. So I don't think they're totally wedded to Norris and Piastri. They're saying, yeah, we like this pairing and it's working really well. And look at how we're dominating the Constructors' Championship. But if they start to turn on each other or put the team second and themselves first and cause us problems, we'll get rid of one of them.
But I think they do want to win the Drivers' Championship. The reason they're not going to prioritise Piastri now is the gap's not big enough.
Course,
you can't, with 7 races and 199 points remaining, when someone's 25 points behind, say, right,
sorry,
you're the second driver now. That's not how it works. Now, if Norris has another engine failure and Piastri's 50 points up, then they might start to think, okay, maybe we will.
Or Max gets closer.
Exactly.
Which Stiller has said. They've talked about it. If Max gets properly in the game, which maybe they don't really think he is at the moment, but they think he might be, then obviously they'll have to do what Ferrari used to do and pick a point in the championship where it's like, right, you happen to be ahead, you happen to be behind, tough luck, you've now got to support. That's as far as they'll go, I think. But I don't think it's a priority in their mind to think, right, whatever's happening, we need to think now about one driver over the other. They're only going to do that if the circumstances really force them down that road.
Yeah, and we're well off that set of circumstance at the moment. The next question for you, Ben, comes from Shrinkinator, who says, if Max somehow wins this championship, will it represent the greatest comeback of all time or the greatest team mismanagement by McLaren in F1 history?
Well, on part one of that question, I think it has to be, doesn't it? I don't think anyone's come back from that far behind and won it.
In a fair fight, no. I mean, you can look at James Hunt against Niki Lauda in 76, but of course Lauda had the Nordschleife shunt. And I've seen a few people compare it to the Raikkonen situation in 2007 when he caught Hamilton, but actually it's easier to make up that amount in 2 races than what Verstappen's got to do, because actually 2 races can go spectacularly wrong, but you're actually needing more than that in this case. Yeah,
exactly. I think it's not a bad comparison in the sense of the 2 McLaren drivers again being really closely matched and taking points off of each other and that allowing the other team to steal in. But I think the distance Max is coming from, the fact that he's one car in the fight and Raikkonen had help from Massa in terms of being in that picture too, does change the game. So it would be, to my mind, one of, if not the most incredible comebacks if he does win the championship. Because, a couple of races ago, he wasn't factoring. Nobody was even thinking of having this conversation of Max being involved. on the second part, in terms of the mismanagement, I mean, it will all depend on whether those individual mistakes or bits of bad luck in terms of how the strategy's played out that have robbed Piastri of probably maybe 14 points at most. I don't think it's been quite as big as maybe people think it is in their minds, if that makes a difference. Now, if he loses the championship to Max by the difference between first and second place, then you could look back in hindsight and say, okay, they could and should have done more. Otherwise, I don't think they've really mismanaged the championship like that badly. They might have mismanaged the odd race where they've tried to over-orchestrate the situation, tried to play too hard in terms of chasing the lost cause of Monza, for example. Oh, let's just stay out and out and out and hope there's a safety car. That's our only way to beat Max. Oh, hang on, there's a Ferrari in our pit stop window. Now we're going to have to kind of re-engineer our normal strategic play to try and stop that becoming a problem. Those are just, individual circumstances. Probably Piastri does worse in that race if things just play out normally. So you can argue it, swings and roundabouts there. I don't think McLaren are mismanaging. I don't think mismanagement would be the cost of the Drivers' Championship. It's more likely, as you said before, to be down to individual mistakes or some kind of catastrophic problem striking the McLaren drivers, like happened to Norris in Zandvoort.
Question now I'll take from Ryan M, who says, is there something missing in Norris's racecraft? A few times he seemed to have Yuki Tsunoda lined up, but just couldn't make the final move. We've seen similar earlier in the year, such as Miami. I don't think Max, Oscar and George have that hesitancy, especially when it's such a crucial move for points. I think I'd take Piastri and Verstappen's racecraft over Norris's, but I don't think Norris is terrible. Sometimes he can actually be a little bit too rash and put his car in positions on the outside where it's never going to work out and be slightly less calculating than he should be. I mean, something missing relative to those, a tiny bit. I don't think it's disastrous, but...
You've seen it last year, haven't you, with his battles with Max?
Yeah.
He managed to show he could get the better of him, but even when he did, in Mexico, there was still that nagging feeling that Max was trying in the bigger picture to screw him over and stop him winning. So was just behaving like outlandishly. I don't feel like Norris has ever shown that he's kind of the boss in a wheel-to-wheel fight. He strikes me as one of those guys, maybe this is harsh, but is better over a lap than he is in the kind of rough and tumble. And there have been plenty of drivers like that. Schumacher was a bit like that. Vettel was maybe unfairly tarred with that brush too.
Yeah. I think you would definitely say Verstappen versus Norris versus Piastri. You'd expect Piastri and Verstappen to come out on top of that more often, but not universally, I would say. So that is an area. I mean, Norris is an exquisite driver, I think you can say, but as a racer, still very good.
Yeah, of course,
not an idiot, but just that.
You can't be rubbish and be in a McLaren Formula One car.
Exactly, yeah. But I think what we've seen this year is maybe we've seen hints of it in the past, but it's really laid bare in a championship fight. Just that little disadvantage he's got there. And there's still time to improve, of course. Right, next question for you, Samarth, from Ben Kelly. Have fans been a bit harsh on Lando Norris this season? It seems that all over social media, he's facing constant ridicule for bottling races and qualifying sessions. No doubt he has not maximised the car this season and has made mistakes, but I feel that if he had a weekend like Piastri's weekend in Baku, the backlash would be at a higher level.
Well, as a Tottenham Hotspur fan, I've seen plenty of ridicule of bottling in my life, and social media is just a cesspit, honestly. My worry is that drivers do actually look at it sometimes as well. I've heard that they do look at social media quite a lot. I doubt...
Not if they're smart.
Exactly. You've got to be smart about it. You've got to block out everything. Now, I doubt Norris is, checking X and Reddit and scrolling.
Not anymore.
Yeah, he better not be, because that's just not good for you. People say all sorts on social media, and I do think it's a bit overblown. At the same time, he has made some catastrophic mistakes. They shouldn't be ridiculed. He's an amazing driver. As you said, you don't find yourself in a McLaren at the top of the championship or near the top contending if you're that bad. And we just talked about his racecraft. I think there's a little notch there where sometimes there's a bit of hesitancy, and in the racing rules, he finds himself on the wrong side sometimes, just because I think Verstappen is just amazing at playing them to his advantage. Verstappen has that on lock. But Norris has made some mistakes this year. Canada was probably the most egregious one. He picked out sprint qualifying in China as one of his biggest as well, where he lost 8 points because he had a bit of a lock-up at the hairpin. And even in Azerbaijan...
He couldn't do that corner all weekend.
Yeah, there was a bit of an issue there. And even in Azerbaijan, he did tap turn 15 coming out. Bit of a mistake again. I think actually Azerbaijan was a bit of a lost opportunity for Norris.
No, he did everything he could.
He did everything he could,
had,
but does that mean he did everything he should?
Well, exactly. I think there's a kernel of truth in the perception there that comes from the fact that Norris has won a couple of races he shouldn't have won. Okay, Piastri messing up the safety car restart at Silverstone is his mistake, but he was the stronger McLaren driver there. There's another example. I'm trying to think of it now because my brain's gone a bit blank. I mean, the races where Norris has definitely been emphatically better, Melbourne, although it was a little bit questionable with Max towards the end of that race, but he was clearly the best McLaren driver at the start of the season. Austria, Monaco, but a couple of wins. Of course, Hungary, where he benefited from the strategy. There we go, my brain's caught up.
Nice.
That doesn't help because it's like, you're kind of a bit lucky. You've got more points than you should have. And then the other thing that underpins it all is the fact that he's the more experienced driver. So you've got him being beaten by a driver who's done much less in Formula One, but who has also won more races. So even though it's close between them, and they are incredibly evenly matched, more evenly matched than probably any pairing in the front of the grid, including the Ferrari drivers, it's not a good look if you're ostensibly the team leader just on the basis of being more experienced, and the younger guy who shouldn't really be beating you yet is beating you.
I think it's a good sign though if you're getting that much flack on social media, because it does mean you're doing something right, and I think he is doing something right. What I wish is that he wouldn't be so kind of. He's gotten better at it, but in his kind of post-race stuff and his interviews and stuff, he does seem a bit down sometimes, and I wish he didn't wear that on his sleeve so much, because there is a feeling that he genuinely believes that he is sometimes just not as good. And I know that he's got self-belief because he's a Formula One driver, but sometimes it does seem...
prerequisite, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a prerequisite. Yeah. You have to think you're... Well, I probably can't say that on air, but you have to think you're amazing. Yeah. And you have to think that. But at the same time, sometimes I do get the feeling that he genuinely believes that he is second fiddle.
I think he takes it to heart more. So he's got the same thing Leclerc has of being quite self-critical outside the car. But I feel like Leclerc now is more compartmentalised with it. He'll just say, even as he did after Baku, it's been a rubbish weekend. I did this, I did that. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have made the mistakes. And then he kind of just moves on almost in the moment of giving the interview. Whereas with Norris, still it feels a bit more, as you say, he's improved, but it feels a bit more like he's still kind of beaten up inside by it. And it takes him, I think he's admitted this, it takes him a few days to kind of decompress after a bad performance and then kind of come to the rational point of view of, okay, well, I did this and I did this, but also this happened and I'm going to work on this now.
Right, next question for you, Ben, from Stuart R. Regardless of who wins, it will be one of the least deserved drivers' titles of recent years, with far too many errors and the title opportunity purely coming together due to a significant dominance. Neither driver has done bad and have had some great drives. There have just been a few too many poor weekends for a World Drivers' Championship. When you compare against performances and consistency from Max Verstappen or even George Russell this season, I don't think without the car either McLaren has had a World Drivers' Championship season. I think Piastri has potential to deliver a worthy season, but not the experience yet. However, Norris hasn't really shown the form and shouldn't be put in the same class. Would love to hear your thoughts on this and your opinion on the most recent least deserved champion prior to this.
Okay, long question. The first part, I think that's harsh on Piastri. Although he's inexperienced, I mean, he's driven really cleanly. Apart from Baku, little mistake at the restart, which, he didn't agree with that penalty. It's a marginal call. Melbourne, both he and Norris went off. He just happened to have more of an off. Other than that, it's been a outstanding season from him, and it's always tempting to say, well, yeah, the car is great and therefore anyone could win the championship in it, but the car is only as fast as the driver can make it go, so you still have to have the quality to execute. But there's been plenty of drivers, including his manager Mark Webber, who's had the best car at his disposal and not even been able to win a race in a season in that car. So let's not give the driver too little credit. And then you compare to Verstappen and Russell. I would say it's fair to argue that Verstappen and Russell overall have been more impressive in their circumstances than maybe the McLaren drivers have. But partly that's because the McLaren drivers are taking points off each other and creating this perception that it's not definitely one or the other's season. Whereas with Russell, he's definitely better than Antonelli. It's been only maybe 2 weekends where he's not been. Verstappen, we know, is completely the number one at Red Bull and no one's even close to him. So that helps. But neither of them have been completely clean either. Russell's gone missing a couple of times. That's allowed Antonelli to steal in. And Verstappen, I mean, what happened in Barcelona? Like, it was complete self-immolation in that race. And there's been other ones like Hungary. Okay, it was a set-up direction, but he's involved in setting that now, especially since Laurent Mekies has been in charge at that team. So not a completely clean season, even from the best driver on the grid. I think on the second part, least deserved. I mean, it's harsh to say that of anyone who's won the World Championship, but there are ones where circumstances have played a role. Probably the two most recent, Nico Rosberg in 2016. If it wasn't for that engine failure in Malaysia for Hamilton, he probably would have won that championship. Rosberg was brilliant that season, relatively speaking, but Lewis was probably the better driver over the year. And then the other one, probably 2007, Kimi Raikkonen's championship. That probably should have gone to one of the McLaren drivers. He was quite fortunate, even though I think Raikkonen deserved, on the balance of his career, to be a world champion.
Right, the final question that I'll take. I haven't got the name of the question asker in this. Sorry about that. But
anonymous question.
It is. Well, it wasn't an anonymous question. I've just not got it in the outline.
Redacted,
but anyway,
redacted.
The question is: Max Verstappen is head and shoulders above the rest in terms of driver quality. Lando versus Oscar is not very high on the list of driver quality. Please comment/discuss. I think that's harsh. Look, if you are looking at the quality of drivers, think of it as you've got a big graph and you're up there and there's Verstappen and you only see a big difference between Verstappen and anyone else when you really zoom in and you see there's tiny differences on top of each other. So I think Piastri and Norris are both extremely high quality drivers. They're outstandingly good.
Top 5
on
the current grid,
I do think Verstappen
nailed on.
Is better, has been better overall this season, but it's tiny differences and consistency of delivery and adaptability and all those things. And like you said, Ben, there have been mistakes from Verstappen this season as well. That Silverstone restart spin as well is another one. So I don't think that they're not very high on the list of driver quality. I really don't. They're very, very high quality drivers. They're just not quite as good at the moment. They may get better. They may not get better, but right now they are not quite as good as Max Verstappen. But that's a little bit like...
No one is.
Well, that's a little bit like saying, I don't know, someone's not quite as good as Ayrton Senna or not quite as good as Jim Clark.
Or Lionel Messi.
Yeah, it doesn't mean you're rubbish, does it? It doesn't mean you're not high quality. It means you're outstandingly good, but there's just one person that's just that little bit better because they are one of the absolute greats. For the final parts of the podcast, we're going to take questions from the Race Members Club on a variety of topics. And if you're interested in the Race Members Club, loads of bonus content, extra podcasts, videos, a really lively community. Do look it up because we think there's some stuff you'll really enjoy there. And thanks, of course, to everybody for the questions. The first question for you, Samarth, from Sam86. As F1 is switching to sustainable fuels in the future, should they bring back refuelling to make things a little bit more interesting?
Oh, that's a great question. They won't. The optics are bad, I think. It looks more sustainable to have a car running on one tank of fuel all the way through the race, and then fueling it up looks worse for sustainability optics. You don't want to do it, and then safety is a massive consideration there. Also, the question of should is, I think it'll be more confusing for people, actually, with all the fuel stuff, affecting strategy. Not only that, it'll mean that the best car will be running on low fuel at the start, and it'll be miles ahead, and they can just come in and add a bit more, and actually their advantage just becomes greater. So I don't think they should. I don't think it's going to add much to the spectacle. Safety is another thing. And now you have like pit walks and stuff, that they do, the annoying stuff that they do during the races and get in our way. They do all that. And you don't want whatever they have, barrels of fuel and lines and all that stuff. It's pretty clean now as it is.
I think you've got the idea of just kind of a big churn of fuel and a big funnel they put in.
Yeah, and a man in leather goggles and a cloth cap, right? You don't want all of that. No, I don't think they're going to do it. And I think it would just mess things up. They're trying to make it more simple.
Right, Ben, a question for you from Jeremy Husted. This is the 4th year I've asked this question per your request. Can we finally draw parallels to the fall from grace of Williams in 1998 to that of Mercedes in 2022? The technically dominant team of an era loses out with regulation changes to become a non-factor in the championship. When I first posed this question in 2022, it was dismissed outright, but I think this observation has been validated in the years since. Thanks for answering again this year.
So hang on, first off, you've requested that this question be asked again?
We've definitely tackled this before, and I suspect I'll have said, well, let's have a look on a longer timeline. Right. But one of my things is, yes, Mercedes is a team that is not doing as well as it should have done, but I would still contend that the reason Williams didn't win races in 98 was losing Renault.
Yes, exactly. That was going to be my answer.
So I would say the effects might be to an extent similar in terms of championship winning team not winning races, but the root causes I feel are different. That's kind of been my argument in the past.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you broadly. Like big picture, it does look similar, but when you look at the details, the Renault thing is a huge factor, and is one of the reasons one of the reasons Williams were relatively comfortable with that is because they had BMW coming down the line. So it was a big team with dominant engine partner, losing dominant engine partner and waiting for new, hopefully dominant engine partner to come along. And then it just turned out the cars weren't good enough to match that. But the other confounding factor was the tyre war. Like Williams started to get kind of outfoxed by Bridgestone. McLaren went to Bridgestone tyres. Ferrari became completely au fait with Bridgestone tyres. And you don't have that now. Everyone's on the control Pirelli. So it's very difficult to extrapolate. Even though the regulations did change markedly for 98, that the tyre is the dominant part of the competitive picture and remains so, which is, you know, why McLaren have put so much effort into understanding how to cool them down at the back. So I think those details really skew the picture. And Mercedes are looking to the next rule change in 26 to reassert themselves because there's an engine element. One of the main reasons they were so dominant in the early part of the hybrid era is because of the engine. It was by far and away the best, and they reaped the benefits of that for season after season. They probably see a similar opportunity now. Williams were looking to a new engine partner to do that, so that there is a similarity there, but they were always going to be kind of customary, not quite fully on board. They never wanted to go full BMW and become like Mercedes. So the fact that you had an independent team with a works partner and this is a full works team also complicates it, because that whole structure makes it really difficult to compare them.
I think because it's mentioned in the question, actually, the technical side, you can argue that Williams started to lose ground technically and Mercedes might be losing ground technically.
Yes.
That's fair. Could be a thing that maps. Obviously, Williams lost Newey. There's not a Newey figure at Mercedes, so that could be the one thing that works. But the thing that meant that Williams didn't long-term bounce back
is Andy Cowell the Mercedes Newey equivalent? That's what I wonder. It's not completely analogous, but in terms of the side of their operation, that was the super impressive bit.
To an extent, yeah. But the engine's winning the championship, isn't it? In the power unit's winning the championship in a McLaren. So
that's true. Yeah.
What I think, when you look at Williams, the reason they've never got back on top again is they went through this extended period where they didn't have the money, they weren't manufacturer owned. They did lose out technically. That's the one thing that maps. But Mercedes has the budget. There's no financial problems at Mercedes. It's got the facilities. So while it could be that Mercedes don't get back on top and it's got a similar effect, I think the causes are a little bit different. But that technical side's interesting. The rules reset's a good test of that, I have to say. So ask the question next year and we'll come back to it.
For the fifth time.
So thank you for keeping us keeping us on that topic, Jeremy. We'll come back to it. Right, question from Tim Martland. Why is a non-yellow flag considered to be a yellow flag? The white flags are for a slow-moving car, which means the drivers have to be aware of it and be prepared to either stop or take avoiding action like a yellow. So why not just have a yellow? The stewards said if there's a white flag for a slow-moving car before a green flag, then the drivers should assume they are in a yellow flag sector and react accordingly. So then why didn't they penalise Franco Colapinto for crashing under a yellow? As they had stated, a white flag should be assumed to be a yellow flag, and Colapinto said he couldn't take the escape road because Gasly was there. Well, my understanding of this is they did say that if you're in a sector and you see the green flag going out at the end of it, you should assume it's gone yellow, even though it wasn't yellow when you entered it. That was one of the things with Piastri. But a white flag isn't followed by a green flag. That's the difference. So you won't get a white flag followed by the green, because the white flag's just its own thing, just to indicate there's something slow moving on the track. So the white flag doesn't become a yellow flag effectively in that scenario. That's the one thing. I've not seen anybody saying about treating white flags like yellow flags. There's a reference to the stewards there, but I think, and I could be wrong, so please, Tim Martland, correct me if I've missed something. But my understanding is that just refers to what they said in the Piastri decision, which is you see the green flag, assume it's gone yellow. So a green
flag is now a yellow flag, and a white flag is now a yellow flag.
A white flag's a white flag on its own. That's fine. But yeah, it's that thing of if you see the green flag go out and it's distant, that probably means the zone you're in is yellow.
You don't just go, which is how all racing drivers are trained. It's now, there's a slow going car. Assume you're in a yellow, but you haven't seen a yellow.
It's a little bit, but I don't think they're ever going to penalise somebody for that. But I think
they couldn't. Could you imagine?
Well, what that precedent lets them do is if somebody really takes liberties. If you see a green flag in the distance and there's a car scattered across the track, and you don't back off, then you can say, "Come on."
Yeah,
you know what was going on there. So that's why the reason the white flag went out for Gasly when Colapinto went off is if there's basically the stewards, the marshals have discretion on this. So basically what they've been told is if a car's off the track and not moving towards the track, up an escape road, you can just use the white so people know it's there, because the white is an awareness flag. It's not a flag that serves any other purpose other than that.
I think that's a bit dodgy, because he went off into the escape road and he was faffing around trying to get back going again. That's a yellow flag situation in normal racing, isn't it? The guy's gone off the track at a corner. He's a danger for the car following, because that is the only place you can go that isn't the barrier if you mess up that corner. So to say that's a white flag situation is disingenuous, I think, from the officials, because a white flag, as you said, is for a slow moving car, not a stopped car in an escape road. Yeah,
so I mean, whether
misuse of flag,
exactly. Whether or not it's right, that's what they did. And in fact, Colapinto, one of the reasons he crashed is because he apparently did think about going up the escape road and thought, I don't really want to hit the other car, so let's try and get...
then went, that's going to get me in even more trouble with Flavio.
Exactly.
I'm just going to throw it into the barrier. I can't win.
But regardless of whether it's a good idea, a white flag doesn't, to my knowledge, there's nothing that said a white flag acts like a yellow flag.
No,
it's purely just if you see the green at the end of a zone, it's probably gone. Yellow, right, Samarth, a question from number 37. Since adapting to the Racing Bulls car, Liam Lawson has been comfortably getting bigger results than Isaac Hadjar. Is this trend continuing, and should he get valued higher than Hadjar by Red Bull?
Number 37 was my racing number.
Oh, nice. There we go. All I can think about is white and yellow flags, by the way. That's all I have in my mind
Brain
now.
scrambled.
Yeah. Isaac Hadjar and Liam Lawson, you're picking up very little margins again, tiny margins, and I think they're in qualifying now as well. You can see that Hadjar's still got the kind of run over Lawson. It's like 0.15.
Has Lawson outscored him? Is that
no?
Well, remember, Hadjar was on the podium.
Yes.
A few races
so Hadjar's podium
sure.
still keeps him ahead, and it's these little, like, if you look at the graph, it's like Hadjar flatlined after Spain. I think there's a bunch of races, and then bang, Zandvoort up again. And I think Hadjar still has the pace advantage over Lawson in those situations. He's a faster driver when it comes down to it.
Well, also the race, like Monza, he went from the back to the top 10, didn't he?
Yeah.
That was a really unlikely point. It's one of those drives where you go, he only got 1 point. So you look at the championship and go, well, that's pretty unremarkable compared to where he is on the graph normally. But the performance to get that, when it looked like complete lost cause, is mighty. Whereas Lawson's had a kind of, to take Baku, a race where he's qualified artificially high, though done really well, scored a 5th place, which is a great load of points, but the race is kind of unremarkable in the sense of just kind of trying not to regress too much to the mean.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, obviously, I think it'll have to be an end of the season kind of shootout. You have to wait till we see. Because, what if Lawson springs a surprise podium in Singapore or something? I'm not saying it will happen. It won't, but
guaranteeing it won't.
Yeah, I'm good. Well, let's not do that.
We'll clip that one out just in case.
I'm saying it might happen. You've got to wait till the end of the season before you pick one driver over the other. But I think Hadjar's been very, very impressive, and his mentality's been brilliant. He's also raced more recently with F2, and he's kind of come off the back of that and done really well in F1. So
I really like that Hadjar has that attitude of when he messes up, which he did in Baku twice, the same in qualifying and the race, which is almost unforgivable. He's so hard on himself, but not in the way where it's like, oh, he's crushed, like Norris maybe is. He's just like angry.
He's a little fighter.
Yeah, he's got a real fire to him, I think, which I'm beginning to warm to.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot to like about Hadjar, and I do hope he gets the chance, genuinely. He's got something about him.
Yeah, and Lawson has picked up as he's settling in at Racing Bulls. And if he can do that consistently, then Red Bull are going to have a headache, because there's a good case for keeping Lawson. But
Lindblad's having a terrible time in F2 at the moment, right? So that's surely not nailed on like it maybe seemed earlier in the year.
Yeah.
Right, the next question for you, Ben, from Ansi Rullamo. What do you think was the moment when Renault took the turn that led Alpine to be the mess they are today? Could they be a front-running team now if Renault had let Cyril Abiteboul implement his vision? I lost hope in the team when they turned into Alpine. In 2020, it still felt like an exciting upcoming works team, but then it became just another midfield team.
Yeah, I think the trouble is that Renault, since coming back into F1 as a works team in 2016, has never been able to escape the midfield.
It's the moment that Renault bought the team.
Well, you could argue that, because it goes back even further, doesn't it, to when Abiteboul was running the engine program, falling out with Red Bull because the engine wasn't good enough and wasn't being invested in enough, in Red Bull's opinion. They decided to cast around for a team to buy or invest in heavily so that they could get more visibility for marketing that they felt they weren't getting from Red Bull when they were winning, and then even more so getting panned by Red Bull when they were losing. They went and bought their old team, which was a cheap way to do it because it was on its knees, but then also it was massively underinvested in as the former Lotus operation. So a load of money was needed, capital expenditure as it would be called now under the cost cap regulations. They did do some of that, but Abiteboul's thing, and this would obviously have come from the top down, was to try to win on 80% or 85% of the resources of the top teams.
Which he sold to the board to help persuade them to take it.
Because they wanted to do it on the cheap. They always did. And he thought, well, I can kind of square that circle by doing what they want, but somehow finding efficiencies that I don't think really exist.
Well, the simple fact is, if you've got 20% less resource than a rival, you are dependent on them
messing up.
Yeah, not fulfilling their potential, because your potential is fundamentally a little bit less.
And so that never happened, really. So Mercedes were amazing in that period. Ferrari were pretty good in that period. And they needed to do more. One of the reasons Mercedes became so good under Toto Wolff is that he went immediately to the board and said, we need more investment to do this. We need more than Ross Brawn was able to secure, basically. And he got them to agree. And then they went and dominated and won, countless numbers of drivers and constructors, not countless, but I just can't remember off the top of my head, 6, 7, more than Ferrari did in a row. And it required that spend at the start. Abiteboul was never going to get that money. And then you get stuck in this cycle of, we need to invest in this stuff, but we need to do it on the cheap. We can't afford to buy the best people or even poach the best people from rival teams. Then you add to that management upheaval. So Abiteboul couldn't work with Vasseur. So they had instability even when he was there. Then Abiteboul gets replaced and you get people trying to kind of fill that void. Then it becomes Alpine because a new guy at the top has taken over on the Renault board side in De Meo. He installs some guy from California, Apple. I can't remember the guy's name now. Rossi, was it?
Well, they had Rossi.
Ron Rossi, he came in and as far as I can tell, he was not a good fit. And then you bring in what my old podcast mate Otmar Zafnauer would say, instability at the top means it's even harder to attract good people because they don't want to join a thing that they don't know if it's going to be the same by the time they get there because of all the long lead times in terms of gardening leave. So they've trapped themselves, and you can trace it back however far you want to trace it back. The only time they seem to look better is when there's a regulation shift. So 2022, they look relatively good, but it's because they've been so underwhelming in the previous rules cycle. They can afford to just basically, as they've done this season, go, you know what, throw this car in the bin. It's what Gasly is clinging to, isn't it? It's like, we haven't developed this car, we're miles off, but next year we're going to have a head start because we've thrown everything at 2026. They will undoubtedly take a leap forward next year, but I doubt it will be to the very front, and then they will just regress as other teams find their feet and catch up on their understanding, and they don't invest the money. I can't see how a Briatore Mercedes customer team, with Renault being less and less interested, is suddenly going to be spending way more money to keep themselves in the fight, unless they're winning and they go, oh wow, actually we're at the front, we need to spend loads of money to stay there, but it's too late by then.
Well, you can only spend as much money as everyone else now.
You need to have invested years and years before in the way that, say, McLaren have done to upgrade their facilities in order to sustain that position. So I just think they're in a doomed cycle of underachievement and mediocrity.
Well, the comparison point was Mercedes. When they bought Brawn, they thought they'd get a turnkey championship winning operation. They thought they could do it cheap. There came a point where they thought, right, where it basically puts them right, either we absolutely commit to this, or there's no point doing it. And they absolutely committed, and then
it worked.
The rest is history. Right, the final question from Andrew Wilson at Altake. With the field, relatively speaking, being pretty close, how much has the Renault power unit's clear deficiencies hindered Alpine? Yeah, it has been a problem. A little bit of a power disadvantage, that's not helpful, but the big problem is the ERS isn't as efficient. So there's some track anywhere that's quite sensitive in terms of the way the ERS operates, that doesn't offer the harvesting opportunities, are a problem. So there's some races where they've been worse than in qualifying. That said, the car isn't great as well. It does have problems over bumps. It's not great over curbs.
It's good at Bahrain, isn't it?
Yeah, very good at Bahrain, yeah. Traction deficiencies at some tracks as well. So yes, the power unit is a problem, but if they're sat there thinking the power unit is everything, then it's like McLaren Honda delusion times a million, I think.
The ERS has been a problem for Renault for going way back, though. I remember even 2016 or 17, they designed a brand new MGUK in conjunction with their then partner Infinity.
The one that took ages to run because it just shook itself to pieces.
It didn't work, and Red Bull had to design chassis mods to fit the old MGUK into the car because otherwise they were all doomed. So I've never felt, that's a long time ago, but I've never felt like Renault were properly on top of the hybrid side. Although it's interesting to me that it's now become a proper weakness. There was a period maybe 2 or 3 years ago where it felt like everyone on the power unit side was broadly equalised, and now they seem to have fallen away somehow. Is it to do with cooling or operation, or just sort of marginal gains in terms of materials? What?
I think it's probably a bit of marginal gains, but also the field's getting so close now.
Right,
so
more exposed.
You could kind of, if there was a 3/10 loss, you could kind of absorb that on the chassis side. Now, if you're giving away 3/10 a lap in a race situation, and if you're in the midfield, you're toast, basically. That's the difference between being front of the midfield or near the back of it. So, yeah, very, very difficult for them. But I don't think simply changing to Mercedes will wipe out all of the chassis side disadvantages. Well, great questions there, as always, from everyone. Great answers from Samarth and from Ben. So thanks very much for those. It's been good to chat, and we're going to keep on talking here on the Race F1 podcast. So we're going to be looking ahead to the Singapore Grand Prix soon. So stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.